My name is Vanessa Pierce. I am 34 years old, and my stepmother thought leaving me stranded in a torrential downpour 36 miles from home would finally break my spirit. She smiled as she drove away, confident she had put the worthless trust fund leech back in her place just days before her precious daughter's millionaire wedding. What she did not know was that the very estate she was returning to the cars she drove and the life she flaunted were entirely owned by me. Her cruelty had just signed her eviction notice. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach a toxic family member that you are the one holding all the cards. Rain lashed against the tinted windows of the Range Rover as we drove down a desolate stretch of the Montauk Highway. The Hamptons were usually beautiful in the early fall, but today, the sky was an angry gray. I sat in the passenger seat staring straight ahead while my stepmother Brenda gripped the steering wheel. Her knuckles were white, her jaw clenched. We were supposed to be picking up the final floral arrangements for my half-sister Chelsea's wedding. Instead, Brenda slammed on the brakes, pulling the luxury SUV violently onto the muddy shoulder of the road. "Get out!" Brenda snapped, not even looking at me. I turned my head slowly. "Excuse me, you heard me, Vanessa? Get out of my car." Brenda finally turned her eyes, flashing with a mix of triumph and deep-seated resentment. "I have had it with your silent judgment. You sit there in your cheap plain clothes acting like you are above us. Chelsea is marrying a Wall Street executive this weekend. She is securing the future of the Pierce family. And what are you doing living off your late mother's pitiful little trust fund, contributing absolutely nothing to our household?" I did not raise my voice. I never do. "Brenda, we are almost 40 miles from the estate, and it is pouring rain." "Good," she spat, leaning over to unbuckle my seatbelt herself. "Maybe a long walk will teach you a lesson in humility. You need to learn your place in this family, Vanessa. You are nothing but a worthless leech riding on your father's coattails. When Chelsea and Devon are married, things are going to change around the house. I will not have you embarrassing us in front of his wealthy friends." She reached across me and shoved the passenger door open. The howling wind and freezing rain instantly whipped into the heated cabin. "Get out!" she screamed, her voice shrill over the storm. "Walk home and think about how lucky you are that we even let you sleep under our roof." I looked at her flushed face, mapping her arrogance. I did not argue. I did not beg. I simply stepped out into the mud. Before I could even turn around, Brenda threw my leather handbag out into a puddle, slammed the door shut, and floored the gas pedal. The heavy SUV kicked up a spray of dirty water onto my slacks as it sped away its red taillights, quickly swallowing into the gray mist of the highway. I stood alone on the side of the road. The rain was freezing instantly, soaking through my silk blouse and tailored trousers. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have cried. I just took a deep breath of the cold ocean air. It was actually quite refreshing. I reached down, picked up my bag from the puddle, and wiped the mud off the logo. Then I lifted my left wrist. I tapped the screen of my smartwatch twice. "Vaughn," I said clearly over the sound of the rain. "Location received, boss." 2 minutes away, a deep, calm voice replied through the tiny speaker. "Take your time," I answered. I barely had time to wring the water out of my hair before a massive bulletproof black Cadillac Escalade crested the hill. It glided to a smooth stop right beside me, completely unfazed by the treacherous road conditions. The heavy door opened, and Vaughn stepped out. At 40 years old, the former Navy SEAL moved with a precise, quiet lethality. He was the head of security for my company, Aegis Asset and Security, and my most trusted ally. He did not say a word as he opened a large black umbrella shielding me from the downpour. He held the door open for me. "Rough afternoon, Ms. Pierce?" he asked neutrally as I climbed into the heated leather interior. "Just shedding some dead weight, Vaughn," I replied, settling into the plush seat. "Let us head home. I have a wedding to dismantle." Vaughn smoothly merged the heavy vehicle back onto the rain-slicked highway. He did not ask for details about what had just transpired. He had been working for me for 5 years, ever since I founded Aegis Asset and Security, and he knew the dynamics of the Pierce family better than anyone. He reached into the center console and handed me a thick, heated microfiber towel. I wrapped it around my damp shoulders, sinking into the leather upholstery as the ambient heat of the cabin worked its way into my bones. From the passenger seat, Organizer Vaughn retrieved a sleek black iPad and handed it back to me. The screen was already glowing, split into multiple high-definition camera feeds. These were not the standard security cameras my father had installed a decade ago. These were military-grade, discreetly integrated lenses, placed throughout the Hamptons estate by my own team. Since my company specialized in high-level asset protection and security for ultra-high-net-worth individuals, upgrading the surveillance of my own property had been my very first move after acquiring it. I swiped through the feeds. The grand foyer was bustling with caterers and decorators carrying towering arrangements of white hydrangeas and orchids. In the formal dining room, my half-sister Chelsea was throwing a tantrum, waving her arms at a terrified event planner. Even without audio, I could tell she was complaining about the placement of the crystal centerpieces. She was 25, completely oblivious to the real world, and entirely convinced that she was a wealthy heiress. Brenda just crossed the town line. Vaughn noted, his eyes scanning the rear-view mirror. She is driving erratically, probably rushing back to make sure she beats you to the house. She wants to be sipping tea in the drawing room when you finally limp through the front gates. I smiled, drying my hair with the towel. Let her hurry. She is burning through gas paid for by my corporate account. Speaking of which, how much did she spend at the florist today? Vaughn tapped a button on the dashboard console. A financial report flashed onto my iPad screen. $42,000, he read aloud. And she put another $15,000 on the platinum card this morning for a bespoke bridal luncheon at a French bistro in town. The caterers for the main event tomorrow are demanding their final payment by 5:00 this evening. That is another $80,000. I stared at the staggering numbers. My father, William Pierce, had been a successful real estate developer once, but 4 years ago, a series of disastrous investments had left him utterly bankrupt. He was facing prison for tax evasion. To protect the family name and mostly to spare the father I once loved, I stepped in. I used a shell corporation under Aegis Holdings to quietly purchase the Hamptons estate out of foreclosure. I paid off his debts. I assumed control of all the accounts. Brenda and Chelsea knew nothing about the bankruptcy. They thought my father was still a titan of industry, and they thought I was just a sad, lonely spinster living off a small trust fund my late mother had left me. They had no idea that every single drop of champagne they drank, every designer dress they wore, and every flower at this upcoming wedding was funded entirely by me. "Should I freeze the cards now?" Boss Vaughn asked. His tone was professional, but I could hear the faint edge of anticipation in his voice. "One call to the bank, and every transaction will be declined. We can stop the caterers before they even unload the trucks." I looked down at the screen. Chelsea was now sipping a glass of champagne, admiring her reflection in the gilded mirror of the hallway. I thought about the cold rain on my skin just 20 minutes ago. I thought about Brenda telling me I was a worthless leech who needed to learn her place. "No," I said softly. "Leave the accounts active. Let her buy the rest of the floral arrangements. Let her pay the caterers. Let her swipe that card for every single luxury she thinks she deserves. I want this wedding to look like $1 million. I want the guests to arrive. I want Devin and his arrogant Wall Street friends to walk into that house thinking they have secured a dynasty." Vaughn nodded slowly, understanding the strategy. The higher they climb. "Exactly," I replied, locking the iPad screen. "The fall will be harder. Drive faster, Vaughn. I want to be sitting in the center of the main living room before she even pulls into the front driveway. I want to see the exact moment the illusion of her power shatters against my reality." The heavy iron gates of the estate swung open as the Escalade approached. I looked through the rain-streaked window at the $12 million property. The lawns were being trampled by workers trying to secure a white event tent against the coastal winds. This was the Pierce family legacy. A fortress of old money architecture my father nearly lost to the bank, now secretly anchored by my corporate portfolio. Vaughn bypassed the chaotic main driveway, steering toward the side entrance reserved for family. The moment the tires stopped, he opened his umbrella, escorting me through the heavy oak doors. The interior was a hive of frantic energy. Event coordinators yelled into earpieces and caterers rushed past carrying silver trays. None of them paid attention to the woman dripping rainwater onto the marble floors. To them, I was just the unimportant older sister. They had no idea they were walking through my house. I headed straight up the back staircase to my private suite. I stripped off the ruined silk blouse and mud-splattered trousers, leaving them on the bathroom floor. I stepped into the steam shower, letting the scalding water wash away the physical chill of the storm and the lingering disrespect of Brenda's actions. I did not rush. I had engineered this timeline perfectly. 20 minutes later, I stepped out of my dressing room wearing immaculate Loro Piana cashmere loungewear. It was a soft, neutral cream color, unpretentious, but undeniably expensive. Quiet luxury. The kind of wealth that does not need to scream for attention because it already owns the room. The heavy fabric felt like armor against their emotional warfare. I slipped on leather loafers, checked my reflection in the mirror, and walked downstairs. The main living room was a cavernous space designed for intimidation. Brenda loved this room. She used it as her personal throne room, entertaining local socialites and pretending she was the queen of the Hamptons. I walked past the velvet sofas and headed straight for the custom mahogany bar cart. I reached for a decanter containing a 50-year-old single malt scotch, a bottle worth more than most people's cars. I poured a generous measure into a heavy crystal tumbler. I walked to the exact center of the room and took a seat in Brenda's favorite wingback armchair. It faced the arched entryway perfectly. I crossed my legs, rested my arm on the armrest, and took a slow, burning sip of the $2,000 bourbon. It tasted like absolute control. Vaughn stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a marble pillar. He held his iPad, his eyes scanning the security feeds. He watched her vehicle tear through the local streets in blind haste. The house around us buzzed with the sounds of wedding preparation, but this room was an eye of calm in the center of the storm. "She is passing the main security gate now," Vaughn stated, his voice barely rising above the rhythmic drumming of the rain against the French doors. "She is driving fast." I nodded, taking another slow sip. The golden liquid warmed my throat. I kept my eyes fixed on the arched doorway. I could hear the distinct crunch of tires violently tearing up the gravel outside the front portico. The heavy thud of a car door slamming shut echoed through the foyer, followed by the sharp, angry clicking of high heels marching across the marble floor. Brenda was complaining loudly to someone on her cell phone, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of the refined elegance she desperately tried to project to the world. "I am telling you, the girl is completely unhinged." Brenda barked into her phone, her voice echoing down the long marble hallway. "I had to leave her out there for her own good. She was threatening to ruin the rehearsal dinner with her negative energy. Let her walk. It builds character. Besides, she probably brought an umbrella in that cheap little bag of hers anyway. Hang on, I need to go yell at the florists. They put the wrong hydrangeas in the entryway, and I will not tolerate incompetence." I smiled, swirling the amber liquid in my glass. The ice clinked softly against the crystal. I did not move a muscle. I just sat there as the warmth of my own home, dressed flawlessly, holding a fortune in my hand, waiting for the exact moment she would round the corner and realize the universe did not revolve around her. The sharp clicking of her expensive designer heels grew louder, much more frantic. She was practically storming toward the room. I took one final deep breath, and then without any warning at all, she stepped directly through the grand archway. Brenda did not look up. She laughed into her cell phone, her voice dripping with venomous delight. She was standing there looking like a drowned rat, Brenda crowed. I drove off. A little exposure to the elements will remind her who runs this family. She lowered the phone, smoothing her damp blazer. Then she saw me. The laughter died instantly. Her eyes widened, scanning my dry hair, my immaculate cashmere loungewear, and the crystal glass of scotch in my hand. Her jaw actually dropped in utter disbelief. "How did you get here?" she stammered, her phone slipping. I took a sip of my drink, letting the silence stretch. I did not move, I just looked at her. Her own hair was frizzy, and the hem of her designer pants was heavily splattered with mud. "I got a ride," I said, my voice flat. Brenda quickly recovered from her shock, her face flushing an angry mottled red. She snapped her phone shut and marched toward me, her heels striking the marble floor like weapons. "A ride," she shrieked, her harsh voice echoing off the high ceiling. "You hitchhiked like some common street rat. Are you out of your mind, Vanessa? Do you have any idea how it would look if Devin and his wealthy friends saw you climbing into a complete stranger's car on the highway? You are a liability to this family." I remained quietly seated, watching her completely unravel. It is fascinating how quickly the illusion of power shatters when it is met with absolute indifference. "No one saw me, Brenda," I replied evenly. "And even if they did, I hardly think my transportation choices are the most embarrassing thing happening in this house today." She gasped, placing a hand over her chest as if physically wounded. "You ungrateful little brat! I am running myself ragged trying to organize the social event of the season for your sister, and you sit here drinking my husband's expensive scotch like you own the place. Put that glass down immediately." I did not put the glass down. Instead, I raised it slightly in a mock toast. "You seem stressed, Brenda. You should try to relax. Your blood pressure is visibly high, and your foundation is melting in this humidity. It is not a good look for the mother of the bride." Her eyes narrowed into furious slits. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, trying to use her physical presence to intimidate me. But I was not the terrified teenager she used to bully. I was a 34-year-old CEO who handled corporate sharks for a living. Brenda was just a guppy throwing a tantrum in a very expensive fishbowl. "Listen to me very carefully, Vanessa," she hissed, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You are going to stay out of sight for the next 48 hours. Devin is arriving tonight for the rehearsal dinner and his family is old money. They do not need to interact with the miserable spinster half-sister who contributes absolutely nothing to society. You will smile when spoken to, you will wear something appropriate, and you will not cause a scene." I took one final slow sip of the bourbon, savoring the smoky finish before gently placing the crystal tumbler onto the mahogany side table. The soft clink seemed to echo loudly in the tense silence of the room. "I would not dream of causing a scene, Brenda," I said, my tone laced with a dangerous calm she was too oblivious to recognize. "I am very much looking forward to meeting Devin. I want to see exactly what kind of man is marrying into this family," she sneered, crossing her arms defensively. "A man with more money and influence than you will ever see in your lifetime. He is a partner at a Wall Street hedge fund. He knows how the world works. He will see right through your pathetic little act." "I am sure he will," I replied softly, offering her a chilling, empty smile. "I am sure he knows exactly how the world works." Brenda glared at me for one long, hateful moment before spinning on her heel. She stomped toward the doorway, pausing just before she exited the room. "Be at the dining table at 7 sharp," she barked over her shoulder. "And try to look like you belong in a civilized home." With that, she quickly disappeared down the hallway, screaming for a maid to come clean her muddy shoes. I leaned back in the wingback armchair, feeling the luxurious cashmere against my skin. The first trap had been set and she had walked right past it without even noticing. Now it was finally time to meet the arrogant Wall Street prodigy she was so incredibly proud of. The next evening arrived with the kind of chaotic energy that only a multi-million-dollar wedding rehearsal could generate. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crisp ocean breeze and a sky painted in hues of deep violet and gold. Caterers rushed past me with trays of caviar and champagne, while a string quartet tuned their instruments in the grand foyer. I stood near the marble fireplace in the main drawing room, wearing a simple yet impeccably tailored navy blue Saint Laurent dress. I blended into the background perfectly, watching the circus unfold in my own home. Then the guest of honor finally made his grand entrance. Devin Washington swept into the room with the practiced arrogance of a man who believed he owned the world. He was 29, tall and athletic, carrying himself with the unmistakable swagger of a Wall Street hedge fund prodigy. He was dressed in a custom charcoal Tom Ford suit that clung perfectly to his broad shoulders. A massive diamond-encrusted gold Rolex caught the light of the crystal chandeliers every time he moved his wrist. He was flashy, loud, and desperate to prove his wealth. My half-sister Chelsea clung tightly to his arm, practically vibrating with smug satisfaction as she paraded him in front of our extended family. My father William hurried over to shake his hand, looking more like a subservient employee than a future father-in-law. Brenda hovered right behind them, beaming with a sickeningly sweet smile. I watched from my quiet corner, swirling a glass of sparkling water. I was mentally analyzing every single detail of his demeanor. At Aegis Asset and Security, I dealt with billionaires and world leaders who possessed real quiet power. Devin was not one of them. He was a shark in a tailored suit, but he was swimming in a tank he did not understand. It did not take long for Chelsea to spot me. She leaned up, whispering something into Devin's ear and pointing in my direction. Devin's eyes locked onto mine. A condescending smirk spread across his face as he detached himself from his adoring audience and confidently strolled over to my corner of the room. Chelsea followed closely, clearly eager for the entertainment. "Vanessa Wright," Devin said loudly, extending a hand. The Rolex flashed aggressively in my face. "I am Devin. Chelsea has told me all about you." I took his hand. His grip was entirely too tight, a classic amateur power play. "It is a pleasure to finally meet you, Devin," I replied evenly, my voice smooth and unbothered. He looked me up and down, his eyes lingering on my understated dress, with thinly veiled pity. "Well, I have to admit you are much quieter than I expected," he said, chuckling loudly. "Chelsea told me you were still living here at the estate. It must be nice having your dad take care of you at your age. But listen, I am a problem solver. That is what I do on Wall Street. I look at underperforming assets and I optimize them." I raised an eyebrow, maintaining a polite, pleasant expression. "Is that so?" "Absolutely," Devin continued, puffing out his chest. His voice was deliberately loud, ensuring that the nearby guests could hear his magnanimous gesture. "I know things have been tough for you. It cannot be easy watching your younger sister marry into real money while you are still struggling to find your footing. But you are family now, and I take care of family. I was talking to my partners at the fund today. We are looking for a new administrative assistant, someone to handle the phones, fetch coffee, manage the calendar. It is an entry-level secretary position, but it pays a decent hourly wage." Chelsea giggled behind her hand, her eyes shining with malicious glee. "That is so generous of you, baby," she cooed, leaning against his arm. "Vanessa, you should really take him up on it. It would be good for you to finally get out of the house and do something productive instead of just leeching off Daddy's estate." The sheer audacity of the offer hung heavy in the air. Devin was standing in a $12 million mansion that I owned, drinking champagne that I paid for, and offering me a minimum wage job fetching coffee at a hedge fund that my company could likely buy out by lunchtime. I felt a sharp, thrilling spike of amusement. I did not get angry. I did not correct him. I just smiled, the kind of gentle, appreciative smile you give to a child who has just proudly handed you a drawing made of mud. I took a slow sip of water, looking right into his arrogant eyes, and carefully prepared to bait the trap. The mahogany table was draped in white silk and covered in cascading floral centerpieces. Brenda orchestrated the seating chart for maximum humiliation. She placed Devin and Chelsea at the center. I was seated at the very far end, wedged between a swinging door that led to the kitchen and an empty chair. It was a physical manifestation of my place. As the first course of seared scallops was served, the verbal assault began. Chelsea giggled, speaking to her mother loudly enough for the entire table to hear. "Mom, did you see the dress Vanessa is wearing?" Chelsea asked with a cruel smile. I saw that exact outfit at a discount store. It is honestly embarrassing. I offered her my old dresses, but she is stubborn. Brenda sighed dramatically, picking up her crystal wine glass. You cannot force someone to have taste, Chelsea. Some people are just perfectly content settling for mediocrity. I gave up trying to refine your sister. She prefers to dwell in the shadows of our success. I kept my posture perfectly straight, cutting a small piece of my scallop. I glanced at my father, William. He stared intently at his plate, terrified of contradicting his wife. He was the patriarch of a dying empire, while I quietly paid for the very food he was currently chewing. Devin decided it was his turn to command the room. He picked up a silver spoon and tapped it against his champagne flute. The sharp ringing sound silenced the chatter. He stood up, buttoning his custom suit jacket, his heavy gold Rolex catching the light from the chandelier overhead. I want to propose a toast, Devin announced, his voice booming with practiced theatricality. To my beautiful bride, Chelsea, and to the Pierce family for welcoming me into their inner circle. Coming from Wall Street, I am used to analyzing investments. I look for high-value assets, growth potential, and strong foundations. When I met Chelsea, I knew immediately she was the ultimate blue-chip stock. Polite laughter rippled down the table. Devin smirked, turning his gaze directly toward my end of the table. And to Vanessa, he continued, his tone dripping with patronizing sympathy. I know it must be difficult sitting alone tonight. While Chelsea is stepping into a life of global travel and elite circles, you are still here figuring things out. But do not lose hope. There is a lid for every pot. You will find a nice regular guy eventually. Someone who appreciates a quiet, simple life. Until then, you will always have a place at our table, even if it is at the very end. More laughter followed, sharper this time. Brenda looked incredibly smug. Chelsea beamed at her fiancé. I placed my fork down on the porcelain plate. I reached for my water glass with my left hand, subtly tapping the side of my smartwatch with my thumb. A tiny red light blinked once. The Aegis secure recording software was now active, capturing high-definition audio of the entire dining room. That is a lovely toast, Devin, I said, raising my voice just enough to carry down the table. My tone was light, pleasant, and completely devoid of the anger they were desperately trying to provoke. You clearly have a strategic mind. I am curious, though. With all your success in finance, what exactly made you decide to marry into our family so quickly? Devin took the bait without a moment's hesitation. He puffed out his chest, taking a large sip of his champagne. He was feeling invincible, surrounded by his friends, and eager to boast about his latest conquest. It is all about synergy, Vanessa, Devin boasted loudly, leaning forward and resting his hands on the table. Love is great, but marriage is an acquisition. I looked at the Pierce family real estate portfolio and saw massive untapped potential. Your father has incredible properties like this estate, but the management is outdated. Once Chelsea and I are married, I plan to step in and optimize the family assets. We are going to liquidate the dead weight, restructure the holdings, and multiply the net worth. I am not just marrying a beautiful woman. I am securing a financial dynasty. He had just proudly admitted to a room full of witnesses that his entire marriage was a calculated financial maneuver to seize my father's assets. He thought he was declaring his brilliance. He had no idea the assets he was planning to seize actually belonged to me. I smiled warmly at him, my smartwatch securely beaming his confession directly to my encrypted cloud server. That is incredibly ambitious of you, Devin, I replied softly, taking a sip of my water. I cannot wait to see how you plan to liquidate the dead weight. Enjoy your meal, Devin. The rest of the dinner passed with Devin loudly detailing his supposed financial conquests. I ate in silence, enjoying the irony of his fabricated wealth. When the caterers began clearing the china to serve espresso and tiered fondant cakes, Brenda tapped her spoon against her crystal cup. She stood at the head of the table, smoothing her silk dress, her eyes locking onto me with predatory anticipation. Now that we have toasted to the happy couple, there is a small logistical matter we need to address tonight, Brenda announced. She clasped her hands together in mock concern. Devin's groomsmen are flying in tomorrow morning. These are top-tier executives from his firm, and we want to ensure they experience the full hospitality of the Pierce estate. Devon nodded approvingly, leaning back in his chair and swirling his glass. They appreciate luxury, Brenda. These are guys who manage billions. We cannot have them staying in some local bed and breakfast down the road. Exactly. Brenda agreed, offering him a saccharine smile before turning her cold gaze back to me. Which is why, Vanessa, you need to clear your things out of the East Wing bedroom tonight. You are moving to the pool guest house for the remainder of the weekend. The groomsmen need the space. The table fell dead silent. The pool guest house had not been renovated in over a decade. The heating system was completely broken, the roof leaked during heavy rains, and the walls smelled faintly of mildew. It was essentially an abandoned storage shed with a rusted bed frame in it. Sending me there in the crisp autumn weather was a calculated insult designed to break me down in front of Devon. Chelsea let out a sharp giggle, covering her mouth to feign politeness. It is kind of rustic, Vanessa. You always liked nature. Think of it as a camping trip. I slowly placed my linen napkin on the table and looked directly at my father. William shifted uncomfortably in his chair, refusing to meet my eyes. He stared at his half-eaten cake, the picture of a broken, cowardly man. "Dad?" I asked quietly, letting the single word hang in the heavy air. William swallowed hard, his face flushing. He finally looked up, offering a weak, pathetic shrug. "It is just for a few nights, Vanessa. We have to be hospitable to Devon's guests. You understand how these things work. Be a team player for Chelsea's sake. The guest house is not that bad if you grab an extra blanket from the hall closet." He was selling me out for the illusion of status. A father throwing his own daughter into the cold to appease a wife who despised him, and a future son-in-law who viewed him as nothing more than a real estate pinata. The last shred of empathy I held for William Pierce evaporated right then and there. I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. He had made his choice. Brenda crossed her arms, waiting for me to argue. She desperately wanted a fight. She wanted me to scream and cry so she could paint me as the hysterical, jealous sister in front of her new favorite audience. Instead, I stood up smoothly, brushing a non-existent crumb from the skirt of my Saint Laurent dress. Of course, I said, my voice perfectly level and pleasant. "If it helps the wedding run smoothly, I am happy to relocate to the guest house. I will pack my things immediately." Brenda blinked, entirely thrown off balance by my immediate compliance. Devon looked slightly disappointed that he did not get to witness a dramatic family meltdown. I offered a polite nod to the table, turned on my heel, and walked out of the dining room with absolute grace. I climbed the grand staircase to my bedroom. The room was exactly as I had kept it since childhood, though now secretly retrofitted with Aegis security measures. I pulled a single leather duffel bag from the closet and began packing a few basic essentials. I did not pack everything. In fact, I purposely left my most valuable items in plain sight to test their greed. I left expensive cosmetics scattered on the vanity. I left my designer handbags neatly lined up on the open closet shelf, and most importantly, I left a vintage mahogany lockbox sitting right in the center of my dressing table. Inside that box was the very bait I knew Chelsea and Brenda could not resist. I zipped up my duffel bag and slung it over my shoulder. I walked out of the room, intentionally leaving the heavy oak door slightly ajar. I made my way downstairs and stepped out through the back patio doors. The night air was biting. The trap was set. Perfect. The walk across the manicured lawn was illuminated only by the underwater glow of the swimming pool. The air had grown colder since the rain stopped cutting through my thin cashmere sweater. I reached the guest house and pushed the swollen wooden door open. The hinges groaned loudly. Brenda had not exaggerated the deplorable conditions. The air inside was heavy with the distinct scent of damp earth and neglected mildew. A single flickering overhead bulb revealed a rusted iron bed frame pushed against a water-stained wall. The mattress looked like it had survived a war. It was exactly the kind of humiliating squalor they thought I deserved. I did not bother turning on the space heater. I simply placed my leather duffel bag on the only wooden chair in the room and unzipped the front compartment. I pulled out my sleek titanium Aegis issue laptop. I sat down on the edge of the awful mattress, the rusted springs protesting loudly under my weight, and flipped the screen open. The biometric scanner recognized my fingerprint, instantly bypassing the military-grade encryption and loading my custom dashboard. Within seconds, a secure message pinged in the corner of the screen. It was from Vaughn. He was stationed in the mobile command center, discreetly parked at the edge of the property line. The message read, "All feeds are live. Target room is currently clear." I typed a quick acknowledgement and expanded the video feed for the East Wing bedroom. The 4K resolution was so sharp I could see the individual fibers of the Persian rug. I adjusted the screen brightness, casting a cold blue glow across my face in the dark, unheated room. I waited. I knew their psychology too well. Brenda and Chelsea were driven by an insatiable greed. Now that Devon was here demanding the lifestyle of a billionaire, the pressure on their fabricated wealth was mounting. They needed liquid cash, and they needed it quickly. It took exactly 47 minutes for my prediction to come true. On the screen, the heavy oak door of my bedroom, which I had purposefully left ajar, slowly pushed open. Brenda slipped into the room first, glancing nervously over her shoulder down the hallway before waving Chelsea inside. They did not turn on the main chandelier. Instead, Chelsea used the flashlight on her smartphone, sweeping the beam across the pristine space. They looked like common thieves trespassing in a high-end boutique. "What if she comes back up for something?" Chelsea whispered, her voice clearly picked up by the hidden microphones I had embedded in the crown molding. "She is not coming back up," Brenda hissed, her tone dripping with venom. "She is probably freezing to death in that shack by the pool. Good riddance. Now hurry up. Devon just told me he wants to upgrade the honeymoon suite in Monaco. It is going to cost another $12,000 that we do not have right now. Your father maxed out the last hidden credit card this morning." Chelsea groaned, sweeping her light across my closet. "I told you we should not have promised him we would pay for the flights. Look at this stuff. Why does she get to keep all these designer bags when she does not even go anywhere? Grab that black quilted one. We can put it on a luxury consignment app tonight. We will say it is vintage." I watched in absolute silence as my stepmother and half-sister began systematically looting my belongings. Brenda snatched a $4,000 handbag from the top shelf, callously checking the interior for any hidden cash before tossing it onto the bed. Chelsea moved to the vanity, her greedy hands rummaging through my expensive skincare creams and unopened perfumes. They were so blinded by their own entitlement that they felt entirely justified in stealing from the woman they had just banished to the cold. They whispered excitedly, calculating the resale value of my property to fund their pathetic lies. "Look at this," Brenda muttered, picking up a silk scarf. "She does not deserve any of this. She is just a selfish spinster hoarding wealth, while her family struggles to maintain our reputation. We are just taking what is rightfully ours." I leaned back on the terrible rusted bed, a cold smile touching my lips. They were weaving their own noose, unaware that every word, every theft, and every admission of financial ruin was being recorded in crystal-clear, high definition. Then Chelsea turned her flashlight toward the center of the dressing table. The beam of light hit the polished mahogany lockbox I had deliberately left behind. Chelsea's breath hitched audibly through the microphone. "Mom," she whispered, her voice trembling with sudden excitement. "Look at this." The trap was about to snap shut. Chelsea stepped closer to the vanity, keeping the flashlight fixed on the vintage mahogany lockbox. It was the only item on the dressing table placed perfectly center. She reached out, running her manicured fingers over the polished wood and the brass keyhole. "Mom, look at this," Chelsea repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She always keeps this locked. I bet she is hiding the good jewelry in here." Brenda hurried over, tossing the stolen designer handbag onto the bed. She leaned in, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. "Well, open it. If she is hoarding cash or vintage pieces, it belongs to the family anyway. We are the ones carrying the financial burden of this expensive wedding." "It is locked tight," Chelsea complained, tugging aggressively at the brass latch. Brenda huffed in annoyance. "Do not be useless, Chelsea. Break it open." I watched through the high-definition feed as Chelsea picked up a heavy solid brass paperweight from my adjacent writing desk. She showed no hesitation or guilt. She brought the heavy object down hard on the lock. The sharp crack echoed loudly through the microphone. The brass latch splintered and gave way. Chelsea eagerly threw open the wooden lid. The flashlight beam illuminated the interior, and both women simultaneously gasped out loud. Resting on a bed of dark velvet was my late mother's prized possession. It was a flawless canary yellow diamond necklace set in heavy platinum and surrounded by a magnificent halo of smaller white diamonds. It was a breathtaking piece of high jewelry formerly appraised at over $2 million. It was not part of the Pierce family estate. It was a private heirloom from my mother's bloodline, legally and undeniably mine. "Oh my God," Chelsea breathed, reaching into the box and lifting the heavy necklace. The yellow diamond caught the harsh light of her phone, fracturing it into a blinding display of immense wealth. "Mom, this is incredible. This is worth an absolute fortune. Why has she never worn this? Because she has nowhere to go and no one to impress." Brenda sneered, her eyes locked hungrily on the jewel. She reached out and touched the flawless center stone. "Your father told me about this specific piece years ago. It belonged to her mother. I thought it was completely lost. To think that ungrateful little brat has been hiding it from us all this time while we struggle to pay for your caterers." Chelsea draped the necklace over her own collarbone, admiring her reflection in the dark mirror. "It perfectly matches my reception dress. Devin would lose his mind if he saw me wearing this. It screams old money." Brenda smiled, a cold, calculated expression of supreme entitlement. "Then wear it tomorrow. It looks better on a bride than a spinster anyway. We will tell Devin it is a Pierce family heirloom being passed down to the new generation. If Vanessa dares to say a single word about it, I will have your father threaten to cut off her trust fund entirely. She will not risk losing her free ride just over a piece of jewelry." In the freezing damp guest house, I did not react with anger. I felt a profound, icy satisfaction. They had just crossed the point of no return. Taking a designer bag was petty theft. Smashing a lockbox and stealing a documented, insured $2 million diamond necklace was grand larceny. They had just handed me the very weapon I needed to destroy them completely. I moved my fingers swiftly across the keyboard. I highlighted the last 10 minutes of the high-definition video feed, ensuring the audio of Brenda actively encouraging the theft and Chelsea's physical destruction of the lockbox were perfectly clear. I hit export and watched the progress bar fill up as the file was securely encrypted and uploaded directly to the Aegis Asset and Security Cloud servers. A green confirmation icon popped up on my bright screen. The file was completely safe. My phone buzzed on the mattress beside me. It was a text from Vaughn. "We have it all, boss. Grand larceny, breaking and entering, destruction of private property." Should I call the local precinct right now? I typed my reply quickly. "Not yet. Let her wear it tomorrow. Let her parade it in front of Devin and his arrogant Wall Street friends. I want the necklace around her throat when the trap finally closes." I closed my laptop, plunging the miserable guest house back into darkness. I lay back on the rusted springs of the mattress, pulling my thick cashmere coat over my freezing shoulders. I was sleeping in a ruined shed, but I had never felt more powerful. The ultimate crime had been committed, and the countdown to their absolute destruction had officially begun. Sunlight pierced the grimy window of the pool house, casting a pale light across the rusted bed frame. I felt no fatigue. I felt a surge of absolute clarity. I threw off my cashmere coat. It was the day of the wedding. Today, the illusion my family had built would finally collapse. I dressed meticulously in a tailored emerald green silk suit. It projected an aura of undeniable authority. I grabbed my phone and walked into the crisp morning air. The estate was completely transformed. A white pavilion tent dominated the lawn, filled with gold chairs. Caterers rushed back and forth, carrying crates of expensive champagne. Dozens of florists were frantically weaving thousands of white roses into the archways. It was a spectacle of wealth that Brenda and Chelsea proudly claimed as their own, and I had funded every single penny of it. I walked through the heavy French doors and entered the grand foyer. The chaos inside was even more intense. Coordinators yelled instructions over a string quartet. I stood near the entryway and surveyed my property. Then I saw her. Chelsea was standing halfway up the sweeping mahogany staircase, posing for her bridal portraits. She wore a voluminous silk gown. A photographer was snapping rapidly as Brenda stood nearby, barking orders about lighting. "Lift your chin," Brenda commanded, waving her hands. "Let the light hit the stones. We want Devon and his family to see exactly what kind of lineage they are marrying into." Chelsea obeyed, tilting her head back and offering a practiced, haughty smile. And there it was, resting perfectly against her collarbone, catching the morning light and throwing brilliant shards of color across the walls, was my mother's canary yellow diamond necklace. Seeing it in person, draped casually around the neck of the woman who had smashed a lockbox to steal it just hours ago, sent a cold thrill right through my veins. She wore it with such arrogant ease, completely convinced she was untouchable. I did not rush. I walked slowly across the marble floor, cutting through the chatter of the coordinators. The photographer paused, glancing over his shoulder as I approached the base of the staircase. Brenda turned her face, immediately twisting into a scowl. "What are you doing in here?" she hissed, stepping into my path. "I told you to stay out of sight until the ceremony begins. You are ruining the aesthetic of the bridal shoot." I ignored Brenda entirely. I looked up the stairs, locking eyes with my half-sister. Chelsea shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, her hand instinctively rising to touch the heavy platinum setting of the stolen necklace. "Good morning, Chelsea," I said. My voice was calm, pleasant, and loud enough for the photographer and the nearby event staff to hear perfectly. "Your dress is lovely. The lace detailing is quite exquisite." Chelsea blinked, clearly thrown off by the compliment. She dropped her hand and puffed out her chest, regaining her false bravado. "Thank you, Vanessa. Devon made sure I had the best designer in the city. It pays to marry a man who actually provides for you." I smiled gently. "I am sure it does. However, there seems to be a slight misunderstanding regarding your accessories." I took one step up the mahogany staircase. The atmosphere in the foyer instantly shifted. The string quartet stopped playing. The event coordinators paused their running. "That necklace belongs to me," I stated clearly, keeping my tone perfectly conversational. "It was left to me by my late mother. It is a private heirloom, not a piece of communal property. Take it off and return it to me right now." A heavy silence fell over the room. The photographer slowly lowered his camera, his eyes darting nervously between us. Chelsea let out a loud theatrical gasp, clutching the yellow diamond, as if I had just physically attacked her. She looked down at me with pure venom. "Are you insane?" she shrieked. "I am the bride. This is my wedding. You are not going to ruin it by being a selfish, jealous lunatic." Brenda stepped forward. Her face flushed with rage. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. "How dare you cause a scene in front of the staff, Vanessa? This necklace is a Pierce family heirloom. You have kept it hidden away like a greedy little dragon while this family struggled. It belongs to Chelsea now. It is her wedding gift." I did not raise my voice. I held my ground on the staircase, looking back and forth between the two thieves. "I am asking you one final time, Chelsea. Take off the necklace." "I will do no such thing," Chelsea snapped, lifting her chin defiantly. "It is mine now. Go back to your miserable little shack and leave us alone." The sheer audacity of her refusal hung heavily in the grand foyer. Before I could even formulate a response, Brenda lunged forward. She positioned herself between her daughter and me like a rabid dog guarding a stolen bone. Her face was contorted with a vicious, unhinged fury that made the nearby event staff physically recoil. "You are a monster!" Brenda screamed, her voice cracking under the weight of her manufactured outrage. "You are intentionally trying to ruin your sister's special day because you are a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand to see anyone else happy. You have contributed nothing to this wedding, nothing to this family. And now you come out of your hole just to throw a tantrum over jewelry that you never use." The commotion was loud enough to draw attention from the adjoining rooms. The mahogany doors of the library swung open and my father, William Pierce, scurried out. He wore a tuxedo that looked slightly too large for his shrinking frame. He took one look at the standoff on the staircase, the horrified photographer and Brenda's red face, and immediate panic washed over him. He did not ask what had happened. He did not look at the $2 million diamond necklace resting on his stepdaughter's chest. He just saw a threat to the fragile reality he was desperately trying to maintain. "Vanessa, please," William hissed, rushing over and grabbing my elbow. His grip was weak, trembling with anxiety. He pulled me toward the secluded alcove beneath the staircase, away from the prying eyes of the caterers and florists. He looked around, frantically terrified that Devon or one of his groomsmen might have witnessed the exchange. "What on earth are you doing?" William whispered harshly, his breath smelling faintly of morning scotch. "You are making a scene in front of the help." I looked down at the hand clutching my arm, then back up at the man who had completely failed me as a parent. "They broke into my room, Dad," I said, keeping my voice dangerously quiet and perfectly steady. "They smashed the lockbox my mother gave me and stole her yellow diamond. That is grand larceny. And you are worried about making a scene?" William swallowed hard. He refused to meet my eyes, looking instead at the marble floor. He knew the truth. He knew exactly what they had done, and he had permitted it. "Look, Vanessa, it is her wedding day," he pleaded, his voice taking on a pathetic whining quality. "Devon expects a certain level of glamour. We have appearances to keep up. Just let your sister wear it. It is just a piece of rocks, Vanessa. Do not be so greedy. You have your trust fund. Let Chelsea have this one day to shine. We will get it back to you tomorrow, I promise. Just go back to the guest house and let us get through this wedding without any more of your unnecessary drama." The words struck me, but they did not hurt. Instead, they acted as a final clarifying light. For years, I had held onto a tiny, irrational sliver of hope that somewhere beneath his cowardly exterior, my father still loved me. I had paid off his massive debts, bought his foreclosed mansion, and funded his extravagant lifestyle from the shadows because I thought he was simply a victim of Brenda's manipulation. But standing in that alcove, listening to him beg me to let a thief wear my dead mother's necklace just to impress an arrogant Wall Street bro, I realized the absolute truth. William Pierce was not a victim. He was a willing accomplice. He was a weak, hollow shell of a man who would gladly sacrifice his own flesh and blood to protect his ego and his social standing. My disgust for him reached its absolute peak, suffocating any remaining affection I held in my heart. He was completely beyond saving. I gently but firmly pulled my elbow out of his grasp. I smoothed the sleeve of my emerald green silk suit, making sure no crease remained. "You think I am the greedy one," I stated softly, staring into his bloodshot eyes. "You think this is just about a piece of rocks. You have no idea what is actually happening today, do you?" He looked at me, confusion mixing with his fear. "What are you talking about?" he stammered nervously. I stepped out of the dark alcove, leaving him completely alone in the shadows. I walked back to the main staircase where Brenda and Chelsea were waiting, convinced they had won another battle. They smiled down at me with pure and unadulterated arrogance. I just smiled right back. "Keep the necklace on Chelsea," I said clearly. "I want Devon to see it. Enjoy your morning." As if summoned by the mention of his name, the heavy oak doors of the grand foyer swung open. Devon strode in, flanked by 3 of his groomsmen. They wore custom tailoring, laughing loudly, and carrying the distinct scent of expensive cologne and misplaced confidence. Devon took one look at the tense tableau on the staircase, my father cowering in the shadows, Brenda fuming, and Chelsea clutching the yellow diamond, and his laughter instantly died. He puffed out his chest and marched directly toward us, eager to play the hero. "What is going on here?" Devon demanded, his voice echoing off the marble floors. He wrapped an arm around Chelsea's waist. She immediately leaned into him, her haughty arrogance dissolving into a flawless performance of a victimized bride. "It is Vanessa," Chelsea whimpered, pointing a manicured finger at me. She is trying to ruin everything, Devin. My parents gave me this beautiful necklace as a wedding gift, and now she is throwing a jealous fit. She is demanding I take it off during my bridal portraits. She says it belongs to her. Devin glared at me, his jaw clenching. He looked me up and down before letting out a loud patronizing scoff. "Are you serious right now, Vanessa?" he asked, shaking his head. "You are really going to pull this desperate stunt today of all days?" I did not flinch. I just looked at the yellow diamond resting against Chelsea's skin, then back up to his eyes. "It is not a stunt, Devin," I replied calmly. "That necklace is my private property. It was taken from a locked box. I am simply asking for it back before I am forced to escalate the situation." Devin let out a sharp, mocking laugh, turning to look at his smirking groomsmen. "Escalate the situation," he repeated. "You are going to escalate this. Listen to me very carefully, because I am only going to explain how the real world works to you once. I work in high finance. I deal with asset allocation and estate law every single day. You do not have the resources, the intellect, or the legal standing to threaten us." He took a step closer, trying to use his height to physically intimidate me. "That necklace is currently residing in your father's house. Under state property guidelines regarding adult dependents living rent-free, any assets kept within the primary domicile, without an independent insurance policy registered to a separate residential address, can easily be classified as commingled family assets. Since your father is the head of the estate, he has the legal right to reallocate commingled assets as gifts. It is considered marital property now transferred to my wife." It was the most absurd, legally illiterate string of financial jargon I had ever heard in my entire life. He was just throwing buzzwords together to sound authoritative in front of his friends. He genuinely believed I was a clueless, uneducated spinster who would be terrified by big words like asset allocation and commingled. I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from laughing out loud. "If you continue to harass my bride, Devin," threatened, his voice dropping to a low, aggressive growl, "I will have the legal team at my firm hit you with a harassment lawsuit so fast it will make your head spin. We will bury you in legal fees. We will sue you for emotional distress, and we will have you legally evicted from this property by Monday morning. You will be out on the street with absolutely nothing. So I suggest you turn around, march back to whatever hole they put you in last night, and keep your mouth shut for the rest of the weekend." He smiled, a smug, victorious grin spreading across his face. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He thought he had put the pathetic sister in her place and proven his ultimate dominance to his future in-laws. Brenda was practically beaming with pride. Chelsea looked at him with sheer adoration. I just stood my ground, absorbing all of his incredibly empty threats with absolute serenity. I looked at the three groomsmen standing behind him, committing their faces to memory. I wanted to remember exactly who was present when his entire fake empire crumbled. "Are you quite finished now, Devin?" I asked quietly. He sneered, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit. "I am completely finished with you. Yes." I nodded slowly, maintaining perfect, unbreakable eye contact. I did not argue with his fake laws. I did not point out the gaping holes in his legal theory. I just let him stand there at the absolute peak of his arrogance. Because the higher he climbed, the more bones he would break when he finally hit the ground. The silence in the grand foyer stretched until it became heavy and uncomfortable for everyone except me. The three groomsmen standing behind Devin exchanged uncertain glances. They had expected me to burst into tears or launch into a hysterical screaming match. They had anticipated a dramatic reality television moment where the defeated spinster fled up the stairs in total disgrace. Instead, they were met with an icy, unblinking composure that clearly unsettled them. Devin tried to maintain his aggressive stance, but I could easily see the microscopic shifts in his body language, the slight clenching of his jaw, the way his hand twitched nervously against Chelsea's waist. He was a man who relied entirely on financial intimidation, and he had just collided head-on with a titanium wall. He had fired his absolute best warning shot, threatening me with corporate lawsuits and immediate evictions, and I had barely even blinked. Brenda, however, was completely oblivious to the shifting dynamic in the room. She stepped out from behind her future son-in-law, her chest puffed out with manufactured triumph and arrogance. "You heard him," Vanessa Brenda sneered loudly, pointing an accusing finger toward the back hallway leading to the kitchen. "Go back to the pool house right now. Do not show your face around here again until the ceremony starts, and only if you can manage to look halfway presentable. We have incredibly important guests arriving soon, and I will absolutely not let your toxic jealousy ruin this family any further." I shifted my gaze from Devon back to my stepmother. It was almost sad how little she understood the world she was trying so desperately to rule. She thought she was the undisputed queen of the chessboard, completely unaware that the board itself belonged entirely to me. I reached a manicured hand into the pocket of my emerald green silk suit. The movement was slow, deliberate, and entirely devoid of fear. Devon instantly tensed his shoulders as if he expected me to pull out a weapon. In a way, I was. I withdrew my sleek smartphone. The bright screen illuminated my face with a faint, cool glow in the dim foyer. Chelsea laughed nervously, clutching the stolen yellow diamond tighter against her bare collarbone. "What are you doing? Are you calling your imaginary lawyers? Please tell me you are not actually going to try and fight Devon on this. You will only embarrass yourself in front of all these people." I did not bother to answer her. I kept my eyes locked directly on Devon as my thumb swiftly moved across the digital keyboard. I opened my highly encrypted messaging thread with Vaughn. I did not need to type a long, drawn-out explanation. He already knew exactly what was happening inside the house, because he had been monitoring the security camera feeds the entire time. I simply typed 5 words. "Initiate protocol, bring the paperwork." I hit send. A fraction of a second later, a tiny green checkmark appeared next to the message. The gears were officially in motion. The trap had been sprung, and there was absolutely nothing any of them could do to stop it now. The local Hamptons Police Department. The immediate eviction notices, the undeniable foreclosure documents, they were all converging on this exact location. I smoothly slid the phone back into my pocket. The room watched me with bated breath, waiting for the massive explosion. But I had no intention of exploding. I took a slow, calculated step backward, creating a physical distance between myself and their profound toxicity. I looked at Chelsea one last time. She was wearing a custom silk wedding gown and standing in a multi-million-dollar foyer, yet she looked incredibly small and desperately insecure. The canary yellow diamond rested heavy on her chest, a glaring symbol of her impending doom. "You can keep the necklace on, Chelsea," I said, my voice cutting through the quiet foyer like a freshly sharpened blade. "In fact, I insist you wear it. It truly does catch the morning light beautifully." Chelsea frowned, clearly confused by the sudden shift in my tone. A second ago I was demanding she take it off, and now I was giving her permission to wear it. Her small mind struggled to process the psychological strategy. "You are letting me keep it?" she asked, her voice laced with deep suspicion. "For now," I replied, offering her a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. "Enjoy the necklace, Chelsea. Enjoy the dress. Enjoy the house. You have exactly 1 hour left to play pretend. I strongly suggest you make the absolute most of it." I did not wait for her response. I did not give Devon the opportunity to offer another pathetic legal threat or allow Brenda to screech another mindless insult. I simply turned my back on them and walked purposefully toward the East Wing corridor. Behind me, I could hear Devon scoff loudly, desperately trying to reclaim his shattered authority in front of his friends. "She is bluffing," he announced to the room, though his voice lacked its previous thunder. "Let us get back to the photos." I kept walking, my heels clicking rhythmically against the marble floor. They could call it a bluff all they wanted. The hammer was about to fall and crush them. I navigated the labyrinth of caterers and florists, stepping into the sunlit conservatory attached to the East Wing. The room had been transformed into a VIP holding lounge for Devon's groomsmen and his most elite Wall Street colleagues before the ceremony. Leather armchairs were arranged in neat clusters, and a temporary mahogany bar had been set up in the corner. I chose a quiet spot near the floor-to-ceiling windows, crossing my arms and looking out over the manicured lawns. The white event tent fluttered slightly in the morning breeze. Everything looked absolutely perfect from the outside. A flawless illusion built on a foundation of massive undocumented debt. In less than an hour, Vaughn would arrive with the local police and the eviction notices. All I had to do was wait. But Brenda could never just leave well enough alone. Her ego, inflated by Devon's theatrical defense in the foyer, demanded total submission. She needed to prove to everyone, and perhaps to herself, that she was the undisputed master of the house. The double doors of the conservatory swung open, and Brenda marched in. Her face was tense, her eyes darting around the room as she barked orders at a frantic event coordinator trailing behind her. The VIP lounge was already filling up with Devon's friends' men who wore expensive watches and spoke loudly about market trends and offshore accounts. They expected immediate service, but the temporary bar was completely unstaffed. "Where is the bartender for this room?" Brenda snapped, her voice cutting through the masculine chatter. "We are paying top dollar for premium service. Devon expects his partners to have fresh champagne the second they walk through those doors." The coordinator checked her clipboard nervously. "I am so sorry, Mrs. Pierce. One of our lead bartenders was in a minor accident on the highway this morning. We are pulling someone from the main tent right now. They will be here in 5 minutes." 5 minutes is unacceptable, Brenda hissed, her face flushing with anger. "I will not have Devon's partners standing around empty-handed like they are at some cheap public networking event. Fix it right now." The coordinator hurried away looking completely terrified. Brenda stood near the bar chest, heaving with indignation. That was when she spotted me standing quietly by the window. A malicious, predatory smile slowly spread across her face. She saw an opportunity not just to solve her catering problem, but to publicly humiliate me in front of the very demographic she idolized. She walked over to the mahogany bar, picked up a heavy silver tray, and began rapidly filling it with crystal flutes of vintage champagne. She loaded the tray until it was precariously full, the expensive liquid threatening to spill over the rims. Then she turned and marched directly toward me. Devon and his 3 groomsmen had just entered the conservatory, laughing loudly at some inside joke. Brenda timed her approach perfectly, ensuring she had their full, undivided attention. She stopped right in front of me and aggressively shoved the heavy silver tray into my hands. Instinctively, I reached out to catch it before it crashed to the floor, the cold crystal clinking sharply together. "Since you are clearly just taking up space and enjoying my hospitality, you can make yourself useful for once," Brenda announced. Her voice was deliberately loud, echoing across the room and silencing the conversations of the wealthy men nearby. "Serve the guests, Vanessa. If you want to live under my roof, you need to earn your keep. Start with Devon and his partners. They are the only people in this house who actually contribute to society." Devon let out a loud, mocking laugh, nudging the groomsmen next to him. "Now that is what I call proper asset reallocation?" Devon joked, his voice full of cruel amusement. "Look at her. The emerald silk suit really makes her look like premium staff. Do you think she expects a tip?" The groomsmen chuckled, swirling their empty hands as if waiting for me to bring them their drinks. Brenda crossed her arms, standing tall and triumphant. She looked at me with a gaze that expected total, crushing defeat. She thought she had stripped away my last ounce of dignity. She thought forcing me to act as a servant in my own $12 million mansion would finally break me. I stood there holding the heavy silver tray. The expensive champagne bubbled softly in the imported crystal flutes. I looked at Brenda, then I looked at Devon, taking in their smug, utterly oblivious faces. I felt the cold metal of the tray pressing into my palms. I did not feel humiliated. I felt a profound sense of anticipation. This was the exact moment the pendulum was going to swing back and shatter. I did not say a word. I simply opened my hands. The heavy silver tray plummeted toward the floor. The impact was deafening. Crystal flutes shattered into thousands of jagged pieces, sending a tidal wave of sticky vintage champagne exploding across the polished marble and onto the tips of Brenda's expensive designer shoes. The sharp crash echoed through the large conservatory, cutting off the laughter of Devon's groomsmen instantly. The room plunged into an absolute suffocating silence. Devon jumped back, his eyes wide with shock, as champagne splattered against the hem of his custom Tom Ford trousers. The groomsmen stared at me in stunned disbelief. No one moved. The only sound left in the room was the soft fizzing of spilled alcohol seeping into the grout of the marble floor. Brenda stood completely paralyzed for 3 agonizing seconds. She looked down at the ruined crystal and the puddle of expensive champagne soaking into her shoes. Her brain struggled to process the sheer audacity of my blatant defiance. When she finally looked back up at me, her face was completely devoid of its former smugness. It was replaced by a twisted, unhinged rage. "You stupid, worthless witch!" Brenda shrieked, her voice breaking as she lunged forward. Before anyone could step in to stop her, she raised her hand and slapped me hard across the left side of my face. The sharp crack of her palm striking my cheek rang out clearly in the silent room. The force of the blow turned my head slightly, but I did not stumble. I did not cry out. I just slowly turned my face back to look at her. My cheek burned with a hot, stinging pain, but I felt absolutely nothing but pure victory. A physical assault witnessed by multiple high-profile bystanders. She had just handed me the final nail for her own coffin. "Are you completely out of your mind?" Brenda screamed, backing away slightly, as if my calm reaction terrified her more than if I had hit her back. "Look at what you have done. You are ruining everything. You are a jealous psycho, and I am not going to tolerate your toxic presence in my home for one more second." She frantically dug into her designer pocket and pulled out her cell phone. Her hands were shaking violently as she punched in the numbers. She held the phone to her ear, her eyes locked onto mine with a manic, desperate energy. Devon stepped forward, looking like he wanted to intervene, but he stopped short, unsure of how to handle the escalating chaos. "Yes, I need police at the Pierce estate in the Hamptons right now." Brenda barked into the phone, her voice instantly shifting into the frantic tone of a terrified victim. "I have an aggressive trespasser in my home. She is violently destroying property and trying to ruin a private multi-million-dollar event. Yes, she just physically assaulted me. I need officers here immediately to remove her from the premises before she hurts someone else." She ended the call and pointed her phone at me like a weapon. "They are coming for you, Vanessa." She spat, her chest heaving. "You are going to be arrested. You are going to be dragged out of here in handcuffs in front of everyone. I am going to press maximum charges and make sure you are locked away. You are never stepping foot on this property again." I reached up and gently touched my stinging cheek. I could feel a faint red mark forming, but my expression remained completely composed. The groomsmen were whispering furiously to each other, clearly uncomfortable with the domestic violence they had just witnessed. Devon glared at me, trying to salvage his tough guy persona, but the cracks were rapidly showing. "You really crossed the line this time," Vanessa, Devon said, shaking his head in mock disappointment. "You cannot just act like a lunatic because you are jealous. The police are going to handle you now. I told you I would have you thrown out. You brought this entirely on yourself." I looked at Devon, then shifted my gaze back to Brenda. I did not bother defending myself against her ridiculous false accusations on the phone. I did not try to explain that she was the one who hit me. It did not matter. The police were already on their way. In fact, they were probably pulling up to the security gates right at this very moment, escorted by my personal head of security. "I am not going anywhere, Brenda," I said softly, lowering my hand. "I am going to stay right here and wait for the authorities. I think it is incredibly important that the police hear exactly who owns what in this very expensive luxury estate." The wait was agonizing for everyone in the room except me. The groomsmen shifted their weight uncomfortably, avoiding eye contact and staring at the puddle of spilled champagne soaking into the grout. Devon proudly crossed his arms, puffing out his chest and offering Brenda a reassuring nod. He wanted to project the image of a protective patriarch entirely unaware that he was standing on quicksand. Brenda dabbed at her dry eyes with a linen napkin, practicing her victim routine. She paced back and forth, stepping carefully around the shattered crystal. Her breathing was incredibly shallow. She kept casting venomous glances in my direction, expecting me to crack under the pressure. I did not crack. I stood by the windows watching the long gravel driveway. Less than 5 minutes later, the wail of sirens pierced the crisp autumn air. The sharp, aggressive sound cut through the gentle music of the string quartet playing in the garden. Red and blue lights flashed brilliantly against the pristine white canvas of the wedding tent, casting frantic, colorful shadows across the manicured lawn. Two heavy Hamptons Police Department cruisers aggressively pulled up to the front portico, their tires crunching loudly over the gravel. The heavy doors swung open and two uniformed officers stepped out. They moved with the swift, purposeful energy of local law enforcement, responding to a violent domestic disturbance at a high-profile address. "They are here," Brenda announced, her voice trembling with a mixture of vindictive excitement and manufactured terror. "You are finished, Vanessa. Do not even try to fight them." Brenda turned and sprinted out of the conservatory, her heels clicking rapidly toward the grand foyer. Devon signaled for his groomsmen to follow, smoothly trailing behind his future mother-in-law to witness my inevitable downfall. I took a slow, deep breath, smoothing the lapels of my emerald green silk suit. I stepped carefully over the broken crystal glass and followed them directly into the main entrance hall. The heavy oak front doors were already wide open. Two uniformed police officers stood in the center of the foyer, their hands resting cautiously near their duty belts as they assessed the chaotic scene. Caterers and florists had frozen in place, watching the drama unfold with wide eyes. Chelsea was standing near the sweeping mahogany staircase, clutching my mother's canary yellow diamond necklace against her collarbone, playing the role of the terrified bride perfectly. "Officer, thank God you arrived so very quickly," Brenda gasped, throwing her hands in the air and rushing toward the lead patrolman. She practically threw herself at him, her voice rising to a shrill, hysterical pitch. "It is an absolute nightmare. We are trying to host a private luxury wedding for my daughter, and this woman has completely lost her mind." Brenda spun around, pointing a rigid, trembling finger directly at my chest as I calmly walked into the foyer. "That is her," Brenda shrieked. "Her name is Vanessa Pierce. She does not live here. She is a bitter, jealous, estranged relative who snuck onto the property to ruin my daughter's special day. She has been violently harassing our guests and screaming at the staff." The lead officer, a tall man with a stern face, held up a hand to pause Brenda's frantic monologue. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and step back. Are you the homeowner?" "Yes." Brenda lied without a single ounce of hesitation. "I am the lady of the house, and I want this woman arrested immediately. She just assaulted me in the conservatory." She smashed a tray of expensive crystal glasses all over the floor. "She is a violent trespasser, and she even tried to steal the priceless diamond necklace right off my daughter's neck this morning. I want her in handcuffs right now. I want to press every single charge possible." Devon stood a few feet away, leaning casually against a marble pillar. A smug, arrogant smirk was plastered across his face. He adjusted his heavy gold Rolex, looking at me with an expression of total superiority. He genuinely believed his fake Wall Street legal threats had miraculously manifested into reality. He thought he had completely outsmarted me and that the police were simply his personal bouncers here to take out the trash. The officers turned their attention to me. They expected to see a deranged, hysterical woman matching Brenda's wild description. Instead, they saw me standing perfectly still. My posture was straight, my breathing was even, and my face bore the faint red mark from where Brenda had slapped me just moments ago. I did not raise my hands defensively. I did not shout over her accusations. I simply maintained eye contact with the lead officer, projecting an aura of absolute, undeniable authority. The audience was watching me very closely right now. The heavy oak doors of the grand foyer remained wide open, letting in the cool autumn breeze. The two patrol officers did not reach for their handcuffs. They did not bark orders at me to get on the ground. Instead, they took a synchronized step backward, clearing a path for a third figure who was just walking up the front steps. He possessed a commanding presence, wearing the crisp, decorated uniform of the Hamptons Chief of Police. He removed his peaked cap as he crossed the threshold, his sharp gray eyes sweeping the chaotic room before locking directly onto me. Brenda saw the gold badges on his collar, and her eyes lit up with renewed manic energy. She genuinely believed the local police department had sent their highest-ranking officer just to cater to her fabricated emergency. "Oh, thank goodness you are here, Chief," Brenda gushed, stepping forward and attempting to place a familiar hand on his uniform sleeve. "This deranged woman has completely terrorized my family. I demand she be taken away in cuffs this instant. We have high-profile guests who cannot be subjected to this kind of violent behavior." The chief of police did not even look at her. He smoothly sidestepped her reaching hand, treating her with the same dismissive indifference one might give to a buzzing insect. He walked straight past her rigid pointing finger, straight past Devon's arrogant posture, and stopped exactly 3 feet in front of me. The entire room held its collective breath, waiting for him to read me my rights. Instead, the chief offered a polite, respectful nod. "Good afternoon, Ms. Pierce," he said, his deep voice carrying clearly across the silent foyer. "Is there a problem with the tenants today?" The word dropped into the room like a live grenade. Tenants. Brenda froze completely, her mouth hanging slightly open as her brain desperately tried to process the sentence. Devon blinked rapidly, the smug Wall Street smirk instantly melting right off his face. He leaned forward, his brow furrowed in deep confusion. Chelsea let out a small confused gasp, dropping her hand from the canary-yellow diamond necklace, as if the platinum setting had suddenly burned her skin. Even the event coordinators and florists stopped breathing, exchanging wild, bewildered looks. "Tenants." Brenda finally choked out, her voice barely a whisper. "What are you talking about?" "I am the owner of this estate. William Pierce is my husband. We own this property." Before the chief could respond, the heavy mahogany doors of the adjoining library swung open. Vaughn stepped out from the shadows, moving with the quiet, lethal grace of a trained operative. He wore his tailored black security suit, a stark contrast to the colorful, chaotic wedding attire surrounding him. In his right hand he carried a thick black leather folder. The gold Aegis asset and security insignia was embossed on the front cover, catching the light from the chandeliers overhead. He walked purposefully across the marble floor, ignoring the gasps from the groomsmen, who immediately recognized the dangerous aura of a man who dealt in real-world consequences. Vaughn stopped at my side, standing at perfect attention. "All exterior gates have been secured," Boss Vaughn reported, his voice calm and professional. "No one enters or leaves the property without your direct authorization. The perimeter is fully locked down." I nodded, keeping my eyes fixed on the chief of police. "Thank you, Vaughn. And good afternoon, Chief. I apologize for calling you out here on a weekend, but it seems my non-paying tenants have decided to escalate their lease violations from simple property damage to grand larceny and physical assault." I slowly turned my head, ensuring the officers could clearly see the angry red handprint swelling on my left cheek. "Brenda physically struck me just moments ago in the conservatory," I stated evenly. "She also destroyed a tray of imported crystal glasses. And my half-sister Chelsea, who is currently standing on the staircase, is wearing a $2 million diamond necklace that she and Brenda stole from a locked box in my private quarters last night. We have the entire incident recorded in high-definition video and audio." Devon took a step back, his expensive Tom Ford shoes suddenly feeling very heavy on the marble floor. He looked at Chelsea, then at the necklace, then at the black leather folder in Vaughn's hand. The financial bravado he had projected just 10 minutes ago was completely evaporating. He was a numbers man, and the equation unfolding in front of him was suddenly adding up to absolute zero. Brenda began shaking, her face draining of color. "This is a trick," she stammered, pointing between me and the chief. "She paid you to say this. William, tell them we own this house." Brenda whipped her head around, frantically searching the grand foyer for my father. William Pierce was still cowering in the shadows near the library doors, his face pale and slick with a cold sweat. He did not step forward to defend his wife. He did not puff out his chest or loudly declare his ownership of the $12 million property. Instead, he shrank back against the dark mahogany wood, looking exactly like a man who knew his darkest secrets had just been dragged completely into the light. "William, say something," Brenda shrieked, her voice echoing off the high ceiling. "Tell these officers to remove her." William just slowly shook his head, staring at the floor. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. Vaughn stepped forward, breaking the tension. He walked directly toward Devon, who was still leaning against the marble pillar, trying desperately to maintain his arrogant facade. Vaughn stopped right in front of the Wall Street hedge fund executive and extended his arm, holding out the thick black leather folder. "I understand you have a deep appreciation for complex financial jargon and asset reallocation," Vaughn said, his deep voice perfectly flat and entirely devoid of any amusement. "Since you like legal documents so much, I highly suggest you review these." Devon hesitated for a fraction of a second, his eyes darting from Vaughn to the folder, and then to me. His ego demanded that he take it. He aggressively snatched the folder from Vaughn's hand, flipping it open with a sharp flick of his wrist. He expected to find a fake lease or some amateur printout he could easily tear apart in front of his friends. But the second his eyes scanned the first page, his entire demeanor completely shattered. Inside the folder were official certified copies from the New York State Land Registry, complete with raised government seals and notarized signatures. I took a slow step forward, making sure every single person in the room was listening to me. The string quartet outside had long since stopped playing. The caterers stood frozen, holding trays of expensive appetizers. My father went bankrupt exactly 4 years ago. I announced, my voice carrying absolute authority through the silent foyer. A series of incredibly foolish commercial real estate investments completely wiped out his portfolio. He owed millions to the banks and even more to the federal government. He was facing a lengthy prison sentence for severe tax evasion. This entire empire you have been boasting about, Devon, is nothing but a mountain of undocumented debt. Devon was reading the documents at a frantic pace, his eyes widening in pure horror. He flipped to the second page, tracing the official transfer of deed with his index finger. To save my father from going to federal prison, I stepped in. I continued, my gaze sweeping over the crowd before locking directly onto Brenda. My corporate entity, Aegis Holdings, bought this entire estate out of foreclosure. I paid off the massive tax liens. I assumed complete financial control of the remaining assets. I allowed you all to continue living here strictly out of pity for a man who did not deserve it. For 48 months, I have quietly funded every single aspect of your lavish lifestyle from the shadows. Chelsea let out a quiet, whimpering sound from the staircase, her hands trembling as she realized her entire identity as a wealthy heiress was a complete fabrication. Brenda looked like she had just been physically struck by a freight train. She shook her head violently, her manicured hands clutching the sides of her expensive silk dress. "No," Brenda gasped, her chest heaving as she struggled to breathe. "No, that is impossible. You are a broke spinster. You do not have that kind of money. William is a successful developer. We are the Pierce family. You are absolutely nothing but a pathetic fraud, Brenda," I said coldly, stepping right up to her. "You have spent the last 4 years treating me like a worthless leech while entirely financing your fake socialite life with my hard-earned money. You wear the clothes I bought. You drink the imported champagne I purchased. And today you are throwing a multi-million-dollar wedding on property that I legally own." I looked at the chief of police, who was watching the scene unfold with quiet professional satisfaction. Then I looked back at the woman who had left me standing in the freezing rain just 24 hours ago. "You are not the lady of the house, Brenda," I delivered the final crushing blow. "You are my non-paying tenants. And as of this very morning, your entire residential lease is officially and permanently terminated by my direct order. I am taking my property and my life back right now." Devon did not hear a single word of Brenda's hysterical denial. His eyes were glued to the thick stack of legal documents Vaughn had handed him. His hands, which just moments ago had rested confidently on Chelsea's waist, were now visibly shaking as he flipped past the deed of trust and into the attached financial disclosures. He was a hedge fund executive trained to spot hidden liabilities and toxic assets. What he was looking at right now was the financial equivalent of a massive nuclear blast. He saw the original foreclosure notices from 4 years ago highlighting massive defaults on commercial loans across 5 different states. He saw the federal tax liens totaling over $7 million levied against William Pierce. And then he saw the final resolution. A complete transfer of all remaining assets to Aegis Holdings, a shell corporation registered under the sole ownership of Vanessa Pierce. He traced his index finger down to William's current net worth declaration, which was legally required for the absolute asset transfer. The number printed in bold black ink was exactly 0. There were no hidden trust funds. There were no offshore accounts. The Pierce real estate empire he had relentlessly bragged about to his partners was nothing but an elaborate luxury ghost town, completely owned and operated by the very woman standing right in front of him. Devon's breathing grew incredibly shallow. He slowly raised his head, looking away from the crisp documents and locking eyes with me. The sheer horror spreading across his face was profoundly satisfying to witness. For 24 solid hours, he had patronized me. He had proudly offered me a minimum wage job fetching coffee at his firm. He had threatened me with his imaginary corporate lawyers and mocked my supposed lack of ambition in front of his wealthy friends. He now realized he had been aggressively insulting the founder and CEO of a private equity and high-level security firm that easily dwarfed his own hedge fund. I did not just have more money than him. I had the kind of quiet, lethal power that could dismantle his entire career with a single well-placed phone call. "Devon, what does it say?" Brenda demanded, her voice shrill and desperate, as she finally noticed the sheer panic etched deep into his features. She reached out and grabbed his tailored sleeve, pulling frantically at the expensive fabric. "Tell these officers it is a fake. Call your legal team right now, Devon. You said you could handle her. Have her thrown out of our house immediately." Devon ripped his arm out of Brenda's grasp as if her touch was suddenly radioactive. He stumbled back half a step, the polished veneer of his Wall Street persona completely disintegrating before our eyes. He looked at Brenda with absolute unvarnished disgust. He saw right through the expensive silk dress and the perfectly styled hair. He saw a broke, desperate woman who had just tricked him into marrying her equally broke daughter. "Are you out of your mind?" Devon hissed, his voice vibrating with a mixture of shock and intense fury. He held the black folder high in the air, shaking the official state documents right in Brenda's face. "This is not a fake, Brenda. These are certified notarized state registry deeds. Your husband does not own a single brick of this estate. He is utterly bankrupt. You have absolutely nothing to your name. You are a complete fraud." The 3 groomsmen standing nearby exchanged alarmed glances. They had flown out to the Hamptons expecting to celebrate their partner's strategic acquisition of an old money heiress. Instead, they were witnessing him getting publicly scammed by a family of destitute squatters. One of the groomsmen, a senior partner at Devon's firm, let out a low whistle and took a deliberate step back, physically distancing himself from the toxic fallout. The sheer embarrassment of the situation was absolute professional poison. Devon turned his furious gaze toward Chelsea. My half-sister was frozen on the sweeping mahogany staircase, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached out a trembling hand toward him. "Devon, please." Chelsea whimpered, her voice cracking pathetically. "I did not know. I swear I thought my dad was still rich. You have to believe me. You thought he was rich," Devon barked, taking an aggressive step toward the base of the stairs. "You told me you were an equal partner in the Pierce portfolio. You told me this estate was going to be our summer home. You paraded me around your exclusive country club pretending you were royalty, while your sister quietly paid for the food on your table. You lied to me about everything." He looked at the canary yellow diamond necklace resting against her chest. The piece of stolen jewelry. He looked at the canary yellow diamond necklace resting against her chest. The piece of stolen jewelry. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. "You actually stole that necklace?" Devin asked, his voice dropping into a deadly quiet register. "You broke into her room and committed grand larceny on the night before our wedding. You were going to let me walk down the aisle and pose for photographs next to a woman wearing stolen property. Do you have any idea what kind of liability that creates for me? If the police arrest you, my name is dragged right through the mud. I am a partner at a multi-billion-dollar financial firm. My reputation is my entire livelihood." Chelsea took a trembling step down the mahogany staircase, reaching her hands out pleadingly. "Devin, please do not say that," she cried, her makeup beginning to run down her cheeks. "I did it for us. Mom said it was a family heirloom. I just wanted to look perfect for you. I wanted your friends to be impressed." "Impressed by you," Devin barked, letting out a harsh, humorless laugh. He threw the thick black leather folder violently onto the marble floor. The heavy stack of certified state registry deeds and foreclosure notices scattered across the foyer, sliding across the polished stone. "Impressed by a destitute fraud who has to steal from her own sister just to look wealthy. You are nothing but a pathetic gold digger, Chelsea. And the ultimate irony is that you do not even have a single ounce of your own gold to dig with." Brenda finally found her voice, stepping forward in a desperate attempt to salvage her rapidly disintegrating masterpiece. "Devin, you are overreacting," she pleaded, holding her hands up defensively. "We can explain everything. William is expecting a massive payout from a new commercial development next quarter. We just hit a temporary rough patch. This is still the Pierce family. We still have the pedigree and the social connections. You cannot just abandon us like this. We have 200 guests arriving in less than an hour." Devin turned his furious glare onto Brenda, looking at her with an expression of pure revulsion. "Paid by her," he yelled, pointing a rigid finger directly at me. "Every single thing in this house was paid for by the woman you treated like garbage. You begged me to pay for your flights to Monaco. You tried to guilt me into upgrading the honeymoon suite because you literally do not have a single dime to your name. You are a delusional parasite, Brenda. There is no pedigree. You are living in a fantasy world funded by the daughter you despise." He reached up to the lapel of his custom charcoal Tom Ford suit. His fingers gripped the delicate white rose boutonniere pinned to the fabric. With a swift, violent jerk, he ripped the flower from his jacket, tearing a small hole in the expensive silk lining. He crushed the pristine white petals in his fist and threw the ruined flower directly at Chelsea's feet. "The wedding is off," Devin announced, his voice booming through the grand foyer, ensuring that every single florist, caterer, and police officer heard him perfectly. "There is no marriage. I am absolutely done with this circus. I am not legally binding myself to a family of broke criminal frauds." "No," Chelsea screamed, her voice tearing through the silent room. She lunged forward, tripping over the heavy hem of her voluminous designer silk wedding gown. She collapsed onto the middle steps of the sweeping mahogany staircase, sobbing uncontrollably. "Devin, you cannot do this to me. I love you. The guests are already on their way. What am I supposed to tell everyone?" Devin did not even look back at her crying form. "Tell them you got evicted," he snapped coldly, adjusting his heavy gold Rolex and straightening his collar. He looked at his 3 groomsmen, who were already backing toward the open front doors, eager to escape the humiliating spectacle. "Let us get out of here," Devin commanded. "This place is a complete liability." Without another word, Devin Washington turned his back on the Pierce family and marched out the heavy oak doors. His groomsmen followed closely behind, practically sprinting toward their rented vehicles parked in the driveway. The sound of their engines speeding away echoed through the open doors, signaling the end of Chelsea's manufactured fairy tale. Chelsea wailed, burying her face in her hands. She sat crumpled on the stairs, her expensive makeup smeared. The stolen necklace hung heavily around her neck. Brenda stood utterly broken in the center of the scattered documents. The loud roar of Devon's rented luxury SUV speeding away down the gravel driveway faded into the distance, leaving behind a suffocating silence in the grand foyer. Chelsea continued to sob heavily into her hands, her voluminous silk wedding gown pooling around her on the mahogany stairs like a deflated parachute. Brenda stared blankly at the open doorway, her mind completely short-circuiting as she watched her ultimate social triumph evaporate into thin air. "Chief," she finally stammered out, turning back to the police officers with wild, desperate eyes. "You have to arrest her." Vanessa chased him away. "She is ruining our lives. You cannot just stand there and let her do this." The chief of police exchanged a brief look with his two patrolmen. The officers stepped forward, their heavy boots clicking against the marble floor. Brenda let out a breathless sigh of relief, stepping aside and pointing a manicured finger directly at me. "Yes, grab her," Brenda urged. "Take her away." But the officers did not walk toward me. They walked straight past me and flanked Brenda on either side. "Excuse me." Brenda snapped, her voice pitching up in confusion as the officers boxed her in. "What are you doing? She is the one you need to arrest. I am the victim here." "Ma'am, you are not a victim," the chief said, his voice firm and authoritative. "And we are not here to arrest Ms. Pierce. We are here to assist with a lawful property eviction resulting from a severe breach of residential terms." He nodded toward Vaughn. "Proceed." Vaughn stepped forward smoothly, bypassing the scattered state registry deeds on the floor. He reached inside his tailored black suit jacket and pulled out a single crisp document printed on heavy stock paper. It bore the red seal of the county court. He held it out to Brenda. "This is an immediate legally binding notice of eviction," Vaughn stated, his deep voice ringing out with absolute finality. "Under the terms of your residency agreement, any criminal activity conducted on the premises results in an automatic forfeiture of your housing rights." "Criminal activity," Brenda scoffed, crossing her arms defensively and refusing to take the paper. "I have not committed any crimes. We are upstanding citizens. This is harassment." "You committed grand larceny," Vaughn replied bluntly. "Last night at precisely 11:42, you and Chelsea entered Ms. Pierce's private quarters without authorization. You actively encouraged your daughter to use a brass paperweight to smash open a locked mahogany box. You then stole a canary yellow diamond necklace valued at $2 million. Brenda went completely pale. "You have no proof of that," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "It is her word against mine, and William will testify that it is a family heirloom." Vaughn allowed a cold, humorless smile to touch his lips. "I do not need his testimony. I have military-grade 4K security cameras hidden inside the crown molding of that bedroom. I have crystal-clear video and audio of you orchestrating the theft. I have already submitted the encrypted files directly to the district attorney's office as evidence." Chelsea gasped from the stairs, her hands flying to her mouth. She looked down at the heavy platinum setting resting on her chest, as if she had just realized it was a ticking time bomb. "You are incredibly lucky my client has decided to be merciful today," Vaughn continued, thrusting the eviction notice into Brenda's trembling hand. "Instead of pressing criminal charges and having you both hauled off to county jail in your expensive dresses, she is simply choosing to remove the toxic element from her property. You are being evicted immediately." I stepped forward, standing beside Vaughn. I looked at Brenda, who was shaking so violently the paper in her hand rattled. She finally understood that the game was completely over. There was no more manipulation. There were no more lies to spin. She was completely trapped by her own greed. "You have exactly 30 minutes left, Brenda," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any sympathy. 30 minutes to do what she choked out, tears of pure humiliation finally spilling over her mascara. 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry in 2 hands, I clarified, gesturing toward the sweeping staircase. "You may take your personal clothing and your cheap toiletries. You will not take any jewelry, any art, or anything purchased with the credit cards I funded." The officers will escort you upstairs and watch your every move to ensure you do not steal anything else. If you are not out of my house in exactly 30 minutes, I will instruct the chief to arrest you both for the theft of the necklace. Your countdown time starts right now." The grandfather clock in the grand foyer chimed out the hour, echoing loudly in the silent room. Brenda stood frozen for another 5 seconds as the reality of the 30-minute countdown finally crashed over her. Panic, raw and unfiltered, completely wiped away the last traces of her manufactured elegance. She dropped the eviction notice onto the marble floor and frantically dug her shaking hands into her expensive leather purse. "Wait, Chief, wait," Brenda pleaded, pulling out a thick wad of cash and a gold-plated checkbook. "Let us just be reasonable. I can pay you. I can double whatever she is paying you to do this. Just give us the weekend. Let us finish the wedding. Name your price. I will write the check right now." The chief of police stared at the money with absolute stone-cold professional disgust. "Put that away immediately, madam," he warned, stepping forward with a stern, authoritative glare. "Attempting to bribe a sworn law enforcement officer is a felony offense. If you do not put that checkbook away and start walking up those stairs right now, I will have my officers place you in handcuffs, and you will leave this property with absolutely nothing but the clothes on your back." Brenda's eyes darted wildly from the chief to the patrolman, and finally to the cold, unforgiving expression on Vaughn's face. She realized with absolute horrifying clarity that she had completely run out of leverage. There were no more social strings to pull. Her money was gone. Her power was an illusion. With a sharp, hysterical sob, Brenda abandoned the bribery attempt. She shoved the checkbook back into her purse and bolted toward the sweeping mahogany staircase. She scrambled up the steps with frantic, desperate energy, pushing violently past her own daughter. Chelsea was still sitting on the stairs, weeping into her silk wedding gown, but Brenda did not even pause to comfort her. Every single instinct in Brenda's body was screaming at her to salvage her material wealth. I followed her up the stairs at a slow, deliberate pace. Vaughn and one of the patrol officers walked right beside me. We reached the second-floor landing just in time to see Brenda sprinting down the East Wing corridor toward the massive master suite. She threw open the heavy double doors and immediately dove into her expansive walk-in closet. By the time I stepped into the room, Brenda was already frantically throwing items onto the king-sized bed. She was not packing basic necessities. She was grabbing her most expensive designer assets. 3 authentic Birkin bags, a pile of cashmere sweaters, several pairs of red-bottomed heels, and a velvet box containing a diamond tennis bracelet. She grabbed a massive Louis Vuitton suitcase and unzipped it with shaking hands. "Put the suitcase down, Brenda," I said, leaning casually against the doorframe of the closet. Brenda ignored me aggressively, shoving the Birkin bags into the luxury luggage. "These are mine," she shrieked, her voice echoing off the custom cedar shelving. "I bought these. You cannot take my personal property. I am leaving, but I am taking exactly what belongs to me." Vaughn stepped into the room, unfolding a printed spreadsheet from his black leather folder. "Ms. Pierce was very specific downstairs," Vaughn stated calmly. "You may take your personal clothing and basic toiletries. You may not take anything purchased with the credit cards funded by Aegis Holdings." "I bought these with the Pierce family platinum card," Brenda screamed, holding up a pair of diamond earrings. "My name is on the plastic. It belongs to me. Your name is merely an authorized user on a corporate account that I fully own and operate," I corrected her, my voice slicing through her hysterical screaming. "And unfortunately for you, I instructed my financial team to freeze every single card under the Pierce name exactly 10 minutes ago. Since the funds used to purchase those designer bags, shoes, and jewelry came directly from my corporate entity, they are legally classified as company assets. If you attempt to pack them, the officer standing right next to me will arrest you for the theft of corporate property." Brenda froze, clutching the diamond earrings. She looked at the police officer, who simply nodded, confirming my statement. He rested his hand on his utility belt, making his stance perfectly clear. "You cannot do this. Brenda whispered, her voice cracking as the sheer magnitude of her loss finally set in. I will have nothing. I will have to start over from scratch. You have exactly what you brought into this family, I replied coldly. Absolutely nothing. Now drop the earrings, drop the designer luggage, and find a cheap canvas duffel bag. You have 22 minutes left before I have you physically removed. Brenda's trembling hands finally gave way. The heavy diamond earrings slipped from her fingers and bounced silently onto the plush carpet. She stepped back from the open designer suitcase, her chest heaving with defeated sobs. She did not argue anymore. She just turned toward the far corner of the expansive closet, frantically searching for a basic gym bag. I watched her for a brief moment, ensuring her compliance before I turned my back on her ruined empire and stepped out of the master closet. Standing in the center of the master bedroom was my father. William Pierce looked completely broken. The crisp tuxedo he wore for the wedding now hung off his stooped shoulders like a poorly fitted costume. His face was stained with fresh tears, his eyes red and puffy. He had followed us up the stairs, finally finding the courage to speak only when his entire false reality had been systematically dismantled. He took a hesitant step toward me, his hands shaking as he held them out in a pathetic gesture of surrender. Vanessa, please, William choked out, his voice cracking violently. You cannot do this. You cannot throw us out onto the street. We are your family. I am your father. How can you be so cold to your own flesh and blood? I stopped walking. I stood perfectly still on the expensive Persian rug I had purchased 2 years ago to replace the one he had ruined. I looked at the man who had once been my hero, the man I had secretly saved from federal prison, and I felt an absolute void where a daughter's love used to be. My own flesh and blood, I repeated softly, letting the words hang in the tense air between us. You want to talk about family right now, William? Where was your fierce loyalty to your flesh and blood when Brenda made me sleep in a moldy, unheated shed last night? Where was your parental protection when Chelsea smashed open my lockbox and stole the only piece of jewelry my deceased mother ever left me? William flinched, physically recoiling from my words. He looked down at his polished dress shoes, unable to meet my gaze. I did not know it would go this far, Vanessa, he whimpered. I just wanted peace in the house. Brenda is difficult. You know how she gets. I was just trying to keep the family together. You were trying to keep your ego together, I corrected him, my voice dropping to a surgical, icy precision. Do not dare to pretend you were acting out of some noble desire for family harmony. You never actually cared about peace or protecting your daughter. You only cared about your false status. You went bankrupt because of your own arrogant stupidity. You were facing years in a federal penitentiary. I bought this house. Bought this. I paid off your millions in tax debt. I gave you a second chance at a dignified life. And how did you repay me? You allowed your wife to treat me like a parasite. You stood by in absolute silence while she emotionally abused me every single day. Tears streamed freely down his wrinkled face. I am sorry, Vanessa, he sobbed, taking another step forward and reaching for my arm. I am so sorry. I made mistakes. But we can fix this. I will divorce her. I will kick them out. Just let me stay. I have nowhere else to go. You cannot do this to your own father. I smoothly stepped back, avoiding his touch entirely. You are not my father, I stated, the finality in my tone echoing sharply through the large bedroom. A father protects his child. A father stands up for what is right, even when it is uncomfortable. You sold me out for a quiet life and the illusion of wealth. You watched Chelsea parade around with my mother's stolen diamond this morning, and you begged me to just let her have it so you would not have to face an argument. William opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He just stood there crying silently. You chose them, I said, delivering the final devastating blow. You chose their lies over my truth. You chose their greed over my sacrifice, and now you get to share their exact fate. I am cutting you out of my life completely, William. You will never hear from me again. You will not receive another dime from my company. You have exactly 18 minutes to pack your bags and leave my property. I turned away from him and walked toward the heavy bedroom door without any hesitation. William fell to his knees on the Persian rug, sobbing uncontrollably into his hands. I simply did not ever look back at him. I walked down the grand staircase, my emerald green silk suit moving fluidly with each step. The house felt different already. The oppressive weight of their entitlement was lifting, replaced by the crisp, undeniable reality of my ownership. Down in the foyer, the 30-minute deadline had officially expired. Vaughn stood by the front entrance, checking his matte black watch. He looked up as I reached the bottom step and gave a single sharp nod. Time was up. The two patrol officers began their sweep of the upper floors. Minutes later, the agonizing procession began. Chelsea appeared at the top of the stairs first. The voluminous silk wedding gown she had paraded around in all morning was now her heaviest burden. The hem was stained with dirt and spilled champagne dragging miserably against the mahogany steps. In her hands she clutched a cheap, faded canvas gym bag she had likely dug out of the basement. Her flawless makeup was completely ruined, dark streaks of mascara running down her pale cheeks. She did not look at me. She kept her eyes fixed firmly on her own ruined shoes. Brenda followed closely behind her daughter. The transformation was absolute. Without her stolen diamond earrings, her luxury handbags, and her manufactured arrogance, she looked incredibly small and desperately ordinary. She carried a mismatched nylon duffel bag packed only with basic clothing. Her designer heels clicked unevenly on the stairs, lacking their usual aggressive cadence. She was trembling, her face drained of all color. Finally, William shuffled down the stairs. He carried a small leather overnight bag. He looked 10 years older than he had an hour ago. He did not speak. He did not ask for mercy again. He just kept his head down, a broken man completely stripped of the empire he had sacrificed his own daughter to protect. The grand foyer was largely empty now. The event coordinators and florists, having realized the multi-million-dollar wedding was permanently canceled, were rapidly dismantling the floral arches and packing up their equipment. They moved around my family as if they were invisible, entirely focused on salvaging their inventory. Vaughn pulled open the heavy oak front doors. The crisp autumn breeze that had filled the room earlier had vanished. The sky outside had turned a bruised, angry purple. A heavy freezing rain had begun to fall, drumming loudly against the stone portico and the gravel driveway. It was the exact same torrential downpour from yesterday afternoon. The universe has a remarkable sense of poetic justice. "Move along," Vaughn instructed, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. The officers stepped forward, guiding the three of them toward the open doorway. Brenda paused at the threshold. The cold wind whipped her frizzy hair around her face. She looked out at the freezing rain, then slowly turned her head to look back at me. I was standing near the marble fireplace, perfectly warm and perfectly dry. I held a fresh glass of sparkling water, watching her with the exact same serene indifference I had shown her 24 hours ago on the side of the Montauk Highway. She finally understood. This was not a sudden explosion of anger. This was a calculated, precise execution of karma. She had thrown me out into the storm to teach me a lesson in humility. Now she was being thrown out into the exact same storm, stripped of everything she valued, while I stood safely inside the fortress she falsely claimed to rule. Brenda opened her mouth, perhaps to hurl one last insult or offer one final pathetic plea, but Vaughn did not give her the chance. "Let us go," Vaughn commanded, stepping forward and physically blocking her view of the interior. Brenda flinched, turning her back to the warmth of the house. She stepped out onto the wet stone portico. Chelsea followed, shivering violently, as the freezing rain immediately soaked into the delicate silk of her ruined wedding dress, flattening the expensive fabric against her legs. William walked out last, his shoulders hunched against the sudden chill. The police officers followed them out, standing under the protective overhang of the portico to ensure they kept walking. My family trudged down the stone steps and stepped onto the wet gravel driveway. They had no luxury SUV waiting for them. They had no driver. They had no active credit cards to call a private car service. They stood in the pouring rain, clutching their cheap duffel bags, looking around the massive estate they had just lost forever. I walked slowly toward the open doorway, stopping just short of the threshold. I did not step out into the cold. I just stood there, letting the ambient heat of my house wrap around me and watched them shiver in the storm. I watched them trudge down the long, winding driveway, their figures shrinking against the backdrop of the relentless storm. The rain showed absolutely no mercy, soaking entirely through Chelsea's ruined silk wedding gown and matting Brenda's frizzy hair flat to her face. William stumbled once on the wet gravel, nearly dropping his small leather overnight bag, but neither his wife nor his daughter reached out to help him catch his balance. They were completely fractured, turning on each other the moment their fabricated wealth vanished. They were entirely on their own now, walking toward a highway with no destination and no resources. The chief of police stepped back under the protective cover of the portico, shaking the heavy water from his dark uniform jacket. He turned to me, his expression professional, but carrying a distinct hint of quiet respect for how flawlessly the situation had been handled. He signaled to one of his patrol officers, who immediately approached holding a heavy, clear plastic evidence bag. Inside the bag, resting awkwardly against the cheap industrial plastic, was the canary yellow diamond necklace. Chelsea had surrendered it just before stepping out into the freezing rain, crying hysterically as Vaughn formally documented the return of stolen property. The chief unsealed the bag and carefully handed the heavy platinum piece back to me. I thanked him, feeling the familiar reassuring weight of my mother's legacy returning to my palm. The officers tipped their hats respectfully, confirming the property was completely secure and the trespassers were officially and permanently removed from the premises. They returned to their cruisers, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting off the wet pavement as they drove slowly down the gravel path, escorting my former family off the estate for the very last time. Vaughn stepped inside and firmly pulled the heavy oak front doors shut. The loud, solid click of the deadbolt locking into place echoed through the massive grand foyer. It was the sound of absolute finality. The roaring storm outside was instantly muted, leaving only the quiet, peaceful hum of my own home. I gave Vaughn a brief nod of deep gratitude, silently dismissing him to his post at the Mobile Security Command Center. I was finally alone. I looked down at the flawless yellow diamond resting in my hand. It caught the soft, warm light of the crystal chandelier, completely unbothered by the chaos and betrayal it had just witnessed. I raised my arms and secured the heavy platinum clasp behind my neck. The cool metal settled perfectly against my collarbone. It did not belong on a terrified, fraudulent bride desperately trying to impress a Wall Street grifter. It belonged exactly where it was right now, a symbol of true resilience and quiet power. I turned and walked back up the sweeping mahogany staircase. My footsteps felt incredibly light, no longer weighed down by the suffocating burden of their constant judgment. I bypassed the dark hallway leading to my childhood bedroom and the miserable pool house entirely. I walked straight down the east wing corridor, pushing open the double doors to the master suite. The room was exactly as Brenda had left it in her frantic, panicked frenzy. Designer clothes were scattered wildly across the king-sized bed, and high-heeled shoes were discarded haphazardly on the Persian rug, completely abandoned in her desperate flight from the law. I ignored the pathetic mess. I walked straight over to the antique crystal decanter resting on the polished mahogany side table and poured myself a generous measure of top-shelf bourbon. The rich amber liquid swirled smoothly against the heavy glass tumbler. I carried the drink across the room and unlatched the heavy French doors leading out to the private master balcony. I stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The rain was still falling heavily, drumming a steady rhythmic beat against the stone balustrade, but the deep architectural overhang kept me perfectly dry. I leaned against the railing, taking a slow, deliberate sip of the smoky bourbon. The heat spread rapidly through my chest, chasing away the last lingering shadows of the past 4 years. I looked out over the sprawling $12 million estate. The manicured lawns, the empty white event pavilion, the winding driveway leading out to the freedom of the main highway. It was all unequivocally mine. The toxic presence that had infected these halls for so long was completely gone, washed away by the very storm they had tried to drown me in. I felt a profound sense of absolute clarity. The simmering anger that had fueled my silent strategic rise to corporate power had entirely evaporated into the cold air. I did not feel bitter. I did not feel vindictive. I just felt an overwhelming, unshakable peace. I took another sip of the bourbon, letting the canary yellow diamond shine brightly against my skin. The trap had closed, the board was entirely cleared, and I was finally free.